Hey there. Welcome to episode 3 of the Artist in Me is Dead podcast. I'm your host, Rhonda Willers. This episode features a conversation with Ira Elliot Corbett. Ira is a non-binary transgender artist living and working in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. In our conversation, I was struck by their practice of asking themselves questions, such as what do they want to share from a happy place of making and exploration. You'll also hear how BTS lyrics from their song Black Swan inspired Ira to ask, am I having my first death of my creativity right now? And how Ira feels a bit like a baby deer learning to walk after recognizing this first death. You'll also want to hear their studio wrap-up answers. One of Ira's responses connected and hit me so deeply I was moved to tears, literally. Please enjoy this episode with Ira Elliot Corbett. Hi, Ira. Thank you for being a guest today on the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So the way I want to start this conversation is to talk about, what has been your creative background in terms of maybe like education a little bit, if you want to talk about any formal education, where you started. And then there's a question I have that will take us like maybe a step before education, but let's start with that. Just how long have you been out of school? Because I know you graduated from undergrad, but maybe share a bit about where you went to school and what you studied and when that was.
Sure. I went to, first I went to Rochester Community and Technical College in Rochester, Minnesota for my first 2 years in college. And then I transferred to University of Wisconsin, River Falls, and I got my BFA in ceramics and a minor in drawing, and I graduated in 2019.
It's always hard to remember, right?
Yes. So it's been 2 years now since I graduated.
Yeah.
2 to 3 years, 2.5.
2.5, but and then you graduated, had a year maybe, and then we went into pandemic mode too. So that's kind of I'd be curious to hear a little bit about that later if we want to talk about that too, just what that meant for your work and your life and other things. So when you were at Rochester and studying there, what was your focus of that, or was it more generals to get started?
I initially went to college to get some sort of like mass communications degree. And then I started on that path. And then over the year, I took more of my art classes. And then I was like, I should probably study art. And then so I did get my associates in liberal arts, but I also got my associates in fine arts. So, and that was just like a general associate's degree in arts. No, there's no focus. Okay.
And when you were doing that, were you gravitating towards any particular mediums or processes, or was it just more the overall experience of being in a creative field?
I do believe I took more ceramics classes more than any other medium, but I did take like photo and I did take painting. I did a lot of stuff. I do think like coming out of there, I was more interested in just the creative area in general. So.
Yeah. And then when you got to River Falls from transferring, did you fall into ceramics and drawing as your two emphasis right away, or was that something that took a little bit of time to find or get your groove in?
It did take a bit. I think I came in as a general art major, and then after a semester I declared a major in ceramics, and then I did a minor in history. And then later on, I declared a minor in drawing.
Okay. Was it art? I'm sorry, cut out just a little bit. Was it art history or history?
Art history.
Art history. Okay. Thanks, sir. I cut out just a little smidge on that one. And then right now, share with us what you're doing. I know from your bio, you're working in tile. And maybe could you tell us a bit about that job and what it looks like on a day-to-day basis and what you do?
Yeah, I got into tile manufacturing, which is not something I thought I would do, but I work at a small shop we moved to St. Paul. It's called Northbury Tile Works, and I'm the main tile maker there. And so I just extrude all the tile and cut it for various jobs for, anytime you want to do like a bathroom or fireplace or whatever. And sometimes we do some really fancy jobs. And so that's basically the overall gist of what I do.
And when you're doing the tile work, is there space in your brain to be thinking about your own kind of like creative thoughts, or is it more of you have to stay very present through the process?
Yes and no. Definitely there's times that I can just kind of let my mind wander. But it has definitely like led me to different ways of thinking relating to my artwork, I think. I think being in something that's a little bit more manufacturer, like a slightly more production line, has helped me think about the way in which I work and like, which was something that I struggled with, I think, or was kind of a weak point, I think, in my process of like kind of having like the start and end like schedule of production and like timing and all that stuff. So I think about how that relates to my work a lot, and how that can work for me in certain ways. And also like I think the pattern making and the repetition has definitely like influenced me. Like I don't have anything to do with design. I just make everything. And so, but being around all those like patterns and like repetitive shapes has definitely like been imprinted on me, I think. And I've thought a lot about like pattern and layering, a lot of stuff.
Oh, I'm curious to ask you a little more about that after a bit. So something I want to kind of, now that we know sort of where you are with your work at like with a job at the moment, but what I'd like to do is kind of step back. And if you can you think about what your like earliest art or like creative memory might be that you had as a human? Like if you go back, what's something that you remember early on?
Okay, I'll have to think a little bit about this.
Yeah, no, take your time. There's no silence is good. We need time to think.
I feel like I have maybe like two to share.
Yeah,
something that's
please.
like a little bit more like active and like maybe a little bit more like passive in reflection. But I just remember all the crafts we did in like preschool in a lot of ways. Like I distinctly remember them having us make this like napkin holder out of wood, and like we got to paint it, and that was like such like a a good moment for me for some reason, like painting this wood. I think that was like a very, very early like craft memory that I was like, this is so fun. Like this is something that I'm really like drawn to.
Do you remember what it looked like even in your head? Can you still see the object, or is it more just the act of it? No, you can see it.
No, I can see it. I think my mom probably maybe got rid of it at this point. I'm not totally sure. But I have a very distinct memory of like, I think the wood was treated differently, and so different parts of the wood like absorbed the paint differently. And I was so mad I couldn't make it more blue on the sides, and like, but it would like the underside was blue, and like the sides were like kind of this light red because it wouldn't absorb the paint. And I remember being so mad about that. But I was like, oh, but like this blue is so pretty that like the wood underneath. So
I read an article last night. I think it was from Washington Post or New York Magazine. I'd have to look it up again, but they were talking about how certain colors are getting harder to find right now because of various methods of how they've been extracted or produced or manufactured. And blue is one of the ones they said next is going to be hard, like ultramarine blue, even the synthetic form of it. So for whatever that's worth, the blue connecting to your blue. What was your other memory that you had that you wanted to share?
So I my dad worked with a coworker who was really into watercolor painting as like a separate thing that she did. And he would send us to me and my sibling Sally. He would like pay her to like teach us how to paint and do art for like some weekends. And I like remember making a painting with her and doing this like winter landscape with her, and like her showing me like how like some of the watercolors like worked, and like specifically partially like painting these like rocks with like yellow and purple she showed me, and like the lighting and like the shades and stuff with that's very distinct in my brain. And I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. And like how like those colors work together.
Yeah. Was that like one of the first times that you feel like someone showed you how materials could work to do something?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay. How do you think those two examples, and we haven't gotten even to your like current work or work that you've made, but is there any tie-ins that you can think of just off the top of your head from those early experiences that still hold true, or that connect to the way that maybe you think about your art now or make your art?
Oh yeah, I have thought about that, and I don't think I have full conclusion, but I definitely think both of those experiences shaped how I feel currently. Like, I think in terms of working with our like art teacher, private art teacher, kind of, we did like a lot of like florals and like landscapes and stuff, and I feel like that absolutely influenced me. I think I definitely just like have this like gravitation towards landscapes because of that, like more like natural formations and all that stuff. Like that's definitely something that has been like appealing to me for, I mean, since then, I'm sure. In terms of like the preschool napkin experience, I think they let us like drill in, like use a screwdriver for the first time and like actually make this napkin holder. And I think like actually physically making something was so like exciting to me that like I don't think I fully like even registered that until later, but in terms of like making it, as I'm doing this like screwing motion on the video.
Great.
But yeah, I think that definitely had some ingrained in me, something that I was like, I really like physically making stuff.
Yeah. Do you think, was there anything about the use of it afterwards too? Because it was in your home, and then did your family use it? It sounded like
I definitely remember it on our table for quite a while, but I don't think it really like fully
it was the
made that
process.
impression on me.
Yeah. Which in a way is kind of more of a gift, because a lot of times we fall in love with the final piece when the process is actually the part that is so fulfilling. And when we can get to that place that the process is the thing we focus on, we're often much freer than in what we allow ourselves to create and make, because we don't have an expectation for the end of it anymore, or the end thing doesn't become this thing that we sort of hold and cradle and protect because it's so special. Or something kind of gift that seems kind of like a gift then about that memory too, having that. Could you tell us about what your current, we're going to jump ahead in what your current studio, we'll call it a studio in quotes, because I want people to learn and experience that studio is so many things. It can be your kitchen table. It might be just you pull out a sketchbook on your lap and that's the studio. But could you describe what your studio today looks like, where you might make work? And if you're not making any work at all, that's also part of this conversation too. So, but just feel free to share what that looks like.
Well, in terms of drawing, I'll try and draw in my living room, like generally it works after I like work out and like calm down like my body kind of, which isn't something that I do that often. It's kind of hard to do stuff at home, I would say, just because I feel like I have so many other things that I should prioritize. So in terms of drawing, I haven't done a lot of stuff. And right now, I guess I'm, in terms of making in clay, I'm lucky enough to have like a work perk and have a work table in the studio in our shop. And so I do try and go on the weekends to work 4 or 5 hours, make something, whether it's like functional ceramics or otherwise. But right now, I guess it's not super consistent. But yeah, usually I'll just do stuff in my living room, or I'll try and do stuff like just try and do something really quick after work, or make a day of it, I guess.
What does it feel like to have that work table at work? And then like, I'm trying to ask the question without being like, is it hard? Here's what I really want to ask. Is it hard to go to work and then try to work in a creative way at a place that you spend your week doing your job?
Yes, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
It is so hard to try and do something like immediately after work, like clock out, like I gotta finish this thing. Like
Yeah.
it is it is really hard to separate myself. It is easier to just come in on a weekend though, like just have that full separation. That's a
Mm-hmm.
lot easier, but it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely something that it's a little hard to separate sometimes.
It is. Was that something that you anticipated might happen once you left the school situation? Or has it been a surprise to you that it feels that way to try and transition from one thing to the other? What could you tell us about that part of it?
Um, Sorry, can you say it
Yeah,
again?
I'll say it more clearly. So like when you were leaving school, like, so the academic environment where you had your studio, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the next part, but did you anticipate that it might be a challenge to transition from, say, your work day to your creative time, or creative time in making, or we could just say like work time to studio time? Or was that a surprise that became sort of hard to make that transition, say, during the week?
I don't think it was. I think the difficulty itself wasn't a surprise, but how difficult it was kind of a
Mm,
surprise, if that makes
mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah, it does.
Um, because when I was in school, I was like, oh, well, I'm working all day. Like, right, I'm
Mm-hmm.
working, like, there's so many things to do. Like, I'm doing all these assignments. Like, I'm also working at a job. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it shouldn't be that hard, right? Is what I asked. But like, of course, that was just a little bit too optimistic, I think. Um, but uh, but the fact that like going from jobs, because I worked at a few different places before. I worked at, got this job as a tile maker. The amount of like physical and mental energy you have to like put forth in a job that you're not fully like you're putting more into than I think what you're getting. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not as much like you're putting out in school. It's like you're putting in all this work and you're like being fulfilled like
Yeah.
by putting in all this work. And
Yeah.
it's not like I hate my job or anything, but it's not something that like feeds me super creatively, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that is a project of my ideas and like my like
Right.
passion necessarily.
Yeah.
Like I don't design it, it's not my house. Like it's not, I don't like and it's like, yeah, it's like an interesting job, but it's not something that is like feeds me in the same way at all. And so
Yeah.
like it's a lot more draining. And so sometimes like coming into like trying to get back into that creative space,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of hard. And also like there's not as much like in the day that really like gives me ideas and energy. It's like, oh, I want to go try that at home. I want
Right.
to go try that in my studio
Yeah. Like, I
as
can't
much.
wait. I
So,
can't wait to work on that idea.
hmm
Did you feel that when you were in school? Like, did you feel with I mean, because in school you're getting assignments and projects which come from an outside person, but did you feel excitement towards ideas that you would generate out of those?
yes.
Yeah. And then that becomes kind of motivating then too, to have that.
hmm
Let's slip back to school time a little bit, back into when you were in university. And could you share with the listeners what your work looked like, what kind of content you worked on, thought about, and maybe a way to do this could be to think of maybe one or two pieces that were just really significant for you in your time as a student, and what those pieces were, and that kind of thing.
hmm Well, in school, I ended up doing a lot of work on self identity, really focusing on my experience as someone who's transgender and someone who's non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
I was asking a lot of questions of myself, like how I fit into this world, like
Mm-hmm.
how I experience the world, and that kind of translated into my work. And that's essentially what my senior thesis was about. A lot of like self-identity, like questions and reflections, and thinking about like really influential pieces throughout that time. Let's think a little bit about that. But I think what really started off this concept of self-identity is that when I was in drawing studio, we did life-size self-portraits.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really what I like used to confront like ideas about gender identity and gender presentation in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Very literally, because it was like a self-portrait.
Right.
And I
And
did
at
two.
life
I did like
scale. Right. They're
mhm.
full body life scale. Yeah.
I did two, and I did like playing with like masculine and feminine ideas. And so I think that was really influential and important in that conceptual development.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like for in terms of like a second piece, it's hard for me to pick out just another just one.
Well, you're welcome to share more. So if there's like more than
Yeah.
two, like feel free to share. I think it's really valuable to hear artists talk about pieces that have been important in their work and in their creative life. I really do.
Mhm. I think it's hard for me to think of one singular piece because I felt like a lot of things I did in my later years of undergrad were just considered unfinished anyway.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I feel like it completely like built on each other. Like I did all these drawing assignments, I did all these like tiles and ceramics, mixing the two. Like it's hard to feel like anything is not separate from one another. And so
Yeah.
what I think in terms of like what was I guess my second piece, and I don't feel like I almost like
You don't even have to
um
frame it that way. Like you could just describe the
mhm.
progression or the connection between things that you started to see or can see now.
I can't help but think of like my like senior thesis show as like one
Yeah.
entire piece
Yes.
because I think that's um I feel like that's very like I don't know like oh my senior thesis like was when like it was so like the pinnacle or something but I don't know sorry not to like downplay it or anything but like
No, but
I just
it's
think about
yeah.
because I think of it that as like a whole like collection right like
Yeah.
they all like had certain ideas that like came together with each separate piece
Yep.
that I was really proud of like how cohesive it was, even though they all felt like separate ideas and like playing with like the entire environment of an exhibition space, which like was, you know, what you're kind of supposed to like, I think, confront in your senior thesis exhibition,
Mm-hmm.
was something that like I think made me realize and like have this great like collection of things that I've worked on throughout my undergrad and like thinking about how I was having a hard time thinking about separate pieces and how it all like came together and built upon one
Yeah.
another. I felt like having all those together, even though it feels like those are still like ideas that are in like continuous process, it feels like
Yeah.
almost like those aren't finished pieces on their own. It feels like a whole finished piece together and having that entire collection together makes me think a lot about so many elements in like an exhibition and how it's like multifaceted it can be and I feel like I'm just like rambling a little bit
Well,
right now but
how about you describe the physical pieces that you had too for us? So
oh right
what were
sorry
no, that's okay. It might help kind of bring it together in a different way in your thinking too, but could you just describe the different physical components of that exhibition grouping? We can just call it a grouping. They're in
yes
conversation with each other. I think you describing it as them being all one piece in a way is, I think, so impactful when an artist can do that, when their work comes together, that it's in conversation with each other to create the whole. That's special when that happens. And then that also gives you fuel for your future work, because I can work on pieces, like elements, and then they will come together if I work on them in this way. But yeah, so describe the physical part for us.
It was focused mostly on the show. Like the whole exhibition was made up of primarily ceramics, mixed media, and a lot of not a lot, but pottery as sculpture. And so I had 2 wall pieces, 1 standing sculpture, and 2 pieces that were functional pottery forms. And so I had 2 wall pieces they were both named Plateau, like 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. And one was, there's these long strips of clay with wire over them that kind of referenced landscapes and clouds. And the other one was straight lines of wire across, kind of like shadow play, just like kind of like square, and it lined up right where my chest would line up. Mm-hmm. And then I did this. This was a little bit of an experimental piece, but there was like this like daily cup practice I tried to do, mm-hmm. with like pinching each cup and journaling about like my experience each day as someone who's specifically like my experience as someone someone who's non-binary, and like my feelings navigating the world and like transferring that touch and those like feelings into this like daily cup, in terms of like daily use. And then I had these 3 bottle forms with really like intense blue surface, and I had this piece called Dead Name that was from the previous spring, and it was this large form that kind of referenced like a large stone, like kind of a gravestone, but it also had lines circling it. It was 23 at the time, thinking about my 23 years on this earth and like changing my name. Mm-hmm. Like that was specifically like thinking about changing my name, mm-hmm. and like the life that was like different after that, mm-hmm. as someone who's non-binary and trans and who changed their name. So.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of transitions in a period of time to process. Mm-hmm. And one thing I was thinking about as you were describing that, the daily cup piece in particular was just this repetition of daily cup, daily use, daily experience. And just and then that kind of ties to your, today in this repetition of tile and pattern and changing patterns. And I wonder, it might be interesting to see what the daily cup might look like today with that same sort of connection to daily experience as well. And daily touch. There's something about that repetition of doing something the same every day, that in a way it lets us maybe track the subtle shifts that happen. I think we're really good at tracking really big shifts or dramatic shifts. We like recognize that like, oh, this was the day that blah, blah, blah happened. But to notice these subtle changes that happen more gradual, that's hard. It's hard as a human. I feel like to see it. I feel like I can't see it as it's happening. It's like something that I only see when I take time to reflect, which also is like, I feel like a general weakness of humans is to stop and reflect.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Maybe it's just me, but I think it's a very intentional thing to do and to put into practice, is that the stopping to really look back and try to see and identify some of those gradual things that have happened over time too. Something I want to ask you about too, which is really a main focus of the podcast, is just maybe sharing now about a time when you started to feel out of touch with your creativity, whether that's a recent experience or it can be a past experience, but maybe share about a time when you recognized that you were out of touch or out of sync with your creative practice.
That actually happened like super recently to me. So I can speak pretty clearly, I think, about this.
It's very fresh.
Yes. I think so. Talking about like what I was really focusing on in undergrad and over like graduating and stuff, I was thinking about like how much, in terms of like when I was thinking about how I was like had a low point in creativity recently. I was like, I just don't really have like the drive that I used to. It feels like I don't have the drive that I used to. Like I feel like there's no like, I almost like feverish making sometimes. Like I'm like, I just don't really have that anymore. Why? Why is that? And like partially it's like, okay, this is kind of like a little bit of the circumstances of life that I came but I also like kind of reference thinking like, sorry, so many words. But
it's a lot.
Thinking about yeah. And like partially it was with that was thinking like just not having the same expectations that you had when you were in school, like that is going to just come at a slower rate in the way that like life is different now, I think. And then I came to that conclusion, but then I was like, but a lot of it was, I think, like why am I making right now, and like why, like what do I want to achieve, and thinking about like a lot of like the conceptual things that I was focusing on. I realized like I was like focusing on a lot of stuff that was like causing me a lot of pain as like someone who was like really grappling with like their identity at the time, and I was thinking a lot about like different aspects of my life that like I was asking all these things, I think, in my art when I should have been asking them in myself and figuring that out like maybe a little bit separately. And it's not like I don't like regret it at all, obviously. Like it's not like something that's like bad to do, but I was thinking like how much like I took time for like some personal work and like some personal like mental health stuff to like figure that kind of stuff out.
Yeah.
And coming to like a lot more like of a peaceful place in that kind of like work and like identity and like figuring things out on like a personal level. Like I'm not asking that stuff in my work anymore. And so like what am I asking? Because it was a lot of it was like I had all these like worries and like all these thoughts about like different, essentially I think like something that's relatable for a lot of transgender people, like all these things about like body dysphoria, all these things about social dysphoria, all these things about like, do I want to medically transition, all these other things. And so after like graduating, I took that time for myself to figure that out. And now I'm like, there's no like drive to like put that into my work anymore. Like I feel like I figured that out. I don't really want to revisit those places anymore. Like it was like kind of like a sad, painful place, frankly. And so and like making that artwork, like, I think definitely like helped me through that. But now I'm like, well, what do I want to make that is happy, essentially? Like what do I like like what do I like, I figured this out for myself, like what's next, like what do I want to like really like cultivate in my life, and like what do I really want to essentially like make from a happy place, like what do I want to make making,
Is it so I'm hearing this too from you right now, is that the work, well, the painful work came from a place of internal too, right? Like a place of inside you, experiences you were having. And even as you're talking about the happy place, like that's coming from inside of you too. Like, so both of these approaches are like the thing that is inside of you that you need to bring forth and out. And it's interesting to think about it that way when I'm, reflect, because I'm a maker too. So I'm like reflecting, I'm like, yeah, like it's what's in you. And I love that question of like happy place. I bet I had a sign up last year in here in my studio that was like, be more playful in your work, because I think like a lot of it, and I don't know if it's like art school where you're expected to kind of work from these depths of challenge or pain, which isn't always true, but there is a lot of, I think there's a space, it cultivates that from individuals pretty easily, where it doesn't always cultivate working from a place of joy and happiness. So it's like, we're a little out of practice for how to do that, maybe on some regards. So it's when you're asking that question and like, what do I want to make? We haven't practiced that very much generally. Like, what is the happy place that is going to generate the next thing? And then like, what do you want to share? What do you want to share with the world with your work? Which feels huge. So maybe that's not a good question to ask ourselves, because that sounds so intimidating. What do I want to share with the world? Maybe it's like, what do I want to share with myself with my work? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in that way, I was like, it feels like a whole different beginning. You know, like I'm like, it's like just trying to think. I'm like, okay, like what do I want to do? Like, if you just like can't think about it so much, it feels like at the beginning, at least, it feels like I'm like, at least for me, I'm like, I feel like I'm like a little baby deer. Like I can't walk anymore, you know?
So. It's so truly like you're wobbly and like trying, but you can't, you can't quite get there. Oh, they're so innocent, those baby deer, when you see them trying to walk in the woods. So I want to ask, was there something that sort of prompted you to recognize that you were out of touch with your creativity? Like, was it just a moment of reflecting? Was it something else you saw from outside of yourself? What do you think prompted that recognition?
Definitely a few different things. I was thinking quite a bit about, like, initially when I was thinking about creativity, I was like thinking about like my circumstances and whatnot. And like part of it was like, I think I was like a little bit making excuses. And so I was like, well, I don't have like a great space to make. Like, so that's why I'm not making that much. Like, and then now it feels like it's one of those things where I feel like I've set up like my physical space and like my circumstances in that way the best I can at this moment. And I'm still not like, like
doing
still
it.
I'm still not doing it. And so I'm like, well, why like, like why am I not doing it? And then I was thinking, and I'm gonna bring maybe this is our transition into music or something like that. Yeah. But I was like thinking a lot. I was like going into other interests, going into like consuming lots of media, which I enjoy. Like I hate and enjoy it, but I think we all do that. Like
I'm with you.
And like I recently I feel like almost a little bit embarrassed to admit this. But I recently like have been starting to like get back into like Korean pop music and like listening to BTS. Like I was interested in just like in retrospect talking about it. It was something I was introduced to in high school, so like 10 years ago, and I was like, oh yeah, like I was a fan then, and then like I feel like I missed everything, and I'm like, oh my god, like it's so big. And then I got like had been listening and catching up, and I was listening to this one BTS album, and they have this one song called Black Swan, and it's essentially like them reflecting on their passions as artists, and like and them talking. There's this particular verse I think in it, like reflecting on like if I like go into the studio and I don't feel passionate anymore, like that's my first step. And like, I was
Oh,
like, am I having my first death right now? Like that like really hit me in a way that like I was like, like it's something that like I think like really like flipped the switch in me at that moment. Like that's
like
something that
grabbing my
like I do.
heart. I'm like,
Yeah, I was
first
like,
death.
and then like, yeah, and so and like I've always been honestly like kind of a secret fan of pop music. I love pop music.
Me too.
Like,
I
and
know.
then so like and so like going back and like I think a lot of like K-pop I think is seen as something that's really like something like younger people are interested in, but not like going back into it, like and it's like seeing translated lyrics and it's like going back into like particularly like BTS's artistry has been like really inspiring and like especially that song. I'm like, oh my god, like my artistic death is happening. And then I heard about your podcast at like similar time, I think, and so I was like, this is all this like coincidence, like all these signs, and so that was like
uh,
a particular music moment that I had.
yeah.
But like also like
Yeah.
other people are obviously thinking this too, you know, like
Yeah. It's not just you out there. And I think that's so important. I mean, we hear it over and over again in different fields or circles, but it really, that was really part of why I wanted to do this podcast is, I mean, we should also disclose you were a former student of mine when I taught at the university. We haven't even said that yet, but I think about those conversations that we had as a class a lot of times at the start of class, and then they would take like maybe an hour of class, 2 hours
yeah,
sometimes.
that would be the class
That would be the class.
sometimes.
That
And that wasn't bad at all. But
but it was like there was so much, I think, that from those conversations that just led me to this podcast content and topic because I know for me, when I was a student, I felt like the only examples I ever had were people who just seemed to always be making and like they never seemed to have a break or a stop or and that works for some people. Like some people, when they're stuck creatively, they just make maybe the same thing they've always made and they trust that working that way, new information will come to them. But I also recognize that life gets really weird sometimes. Like health comes into play, just access to space and resources comes into play. And also sometimes just like burned out from doing the same thing. Like I know artists who have, done the same kind of work for years, and then they feel like they can't experiment because there's an expectation of the kind of work that they create. And the challenge of that and what it does to the way we connect with our creativity, I think, that I wanted to have conversations where people could talk about that part of it because we focus a lot on the success end of the art career or like when things are going really great. But the reality is these lulls happen in these places of kind of stop catch us at times. And, how do you pick up inspiration again? And so like you talking about BTS and K-pop is awesome because that's the thing. Like sometimes it's like the most unexpected place will make you really excited about something different or help you recognize. And I'm such a big fan of using an outside thing and just giving yourself space to recognize the outside thing as the inspiration, and bring that back to the work is, I think, like, I hope more people try to let themselves be open to that happening and be okay with when it just kind of sucks to like not want to make and not, I mean, my studio's in my basement and going down the stairs some days is like, oh, you go down those stairs, you can either go right to the studio or left to the laundry. Which one are you going to do? And it's just, and also just going down the stairs can be a lot some days. And like, it sounds lazy when I say it aloud, but it's also a truth too. Like sometimes it just takes a while to get back to what you want to be doing or what you're going to be doing for sure. Something I want to ask about, so you've had this sort of recognition at this point of, feeling out of touch. What are things that you could maybe identify that stop your creativity? Like, are there is there anything specific that you're like, oh, that really stops your creativity? Like for me, if I don't get enough rest, that definitely stops my creativity. If I'm tired, it's hard for me to do things if I'm physically tired. Is there anything like that for you?
Um, hmm. I think just oftentimes, definitely, I relate to the rest part, but in the way that not giving enough time for myself, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
to like have that creative time. Like a lot of times I'll be like, well, I have all these like commitments to do. I have all
Mm-hmm.
these like cleaning to do. I think it kind of wraps up in like expectations, I think, for myself.
Mm-hmm.
That really like I think constipates myself creatively, I think. And I think that's different because like I'm just like one single person living with one other person in my life. But yeah, I think I don't know how I'm answering this honestly.
Yeah.
I'm just like thinking out loud for a moment.
Yeah. I'm just
Sorry.
saying, no, don't apologize because it's not a thing we often ask ourselves. Like, do we ask ourselves what stops us from doing the thing we want to do? Like, usually that's like, no, because we're avoiding that thing, whatever it is. Like,
Yeah.
we're probably avoiding recognizing that because once you recognize it, it means we'd have to acknowledge it and maybe change it.
Yeah,
So it's like, well, I don't know.
definitely.
I don't know if I want to know what's stopping me from creating. I think,
I just don't think.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Thinking about that. Thinking about that, like, I guess it's not so much like a physical thing. I guess like in terms of like my physical body, but I just don't think like I ever like built it in my life like I should have. Like
Oh,
it's not on the same. It doesn't feel like
yeah.
it should be on the same level as other things, right? And that's I
Mm-hmm.
guess like what I speak to about expectations, like oh, I should do all these other things before I sit down and
Mm.
draw. I should do all
Yes.
these things that are more important in quotation marks.
Right.
Uh, like, but and like I'm someone who also like if I prioritize like creative time, like definitely other aspects of my life will suffer.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just one of those things where I think I've like had a really hard time accepting that,
Mm-hmm.
like, and what I should be doing and like what I
Mm-hmm.
should look like. So I think like
Mm-hmm.
that was really hard to really be like, just because my life doesn't look like other people's, like, doesn't mean it's bad, like,
Yes.
so, like,
It's
I should be able to do this for myself.
mm-hmm. It's hard. I think what I want to emphasize what you said, where you said, if I prioritize my creativity, that means something else has to kind of go. And there's so much truth in that. And
Hmm.
and and then the other phrase I hear you saying is I should be doing this. And we all do that. Like we bring in the shoulds way before the what maybe will fill us the most. And I think this is where like when I can look because we're probably human, this is probably a human trait. Like we like to look for examples to validate our ideas or our thoughts. And I remember I had read an interview with Betty Woodman, the ceramic artist, who said like the laundry can always wait. And like that was her. And I remember when I first started working in our home with my studio and being home working all the time rather than going out and teaching, I had a friend ask like, well, do you just put in like a load of laundry every day while you're home? And I said, no, actually I don't. I made a rule with myself that this is my job. And if I was working a job away from our home, I wouldn't be able to put in a load of laundry during the day. So I do it at night, like everyone else, or on the weekend. And I usually have at least 3 unfolded baskets of laundry in our bedroom at any given
Yeah.
point. And then I made a fun game with, Liz Wendland. She was your drawing professor. So we often do a laundry date and we'll text and say, I've got 3 loads of laundry. And she said, me too. And then we call each other and we fold laundry and talk just about life and some art while we fold laundry. And so it's like turned into this sort of fun thing. And then that way it's not like, so, I mean, as long as everyone has clothes to wear during the week, myself included, I'm like, we're okay. We're like making it. So, but that's breaking, for me, that was breaking an expectation that I learned through example, because it was common that people took care of their laundry right away and always folded and put it away. Like those were the examples I saw. And then once Betty Woodman, I read her say, the laundry can wait. It was like, yeah, it can wait.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something you have to look for in your life is like, what can wait? And just let it wait if it can. Like that might, yeah. I also heard recently this phrase that helped me was, if you don't plan your time, prioritize your time or plan your time, someone else will. And I totally saw that happen to myself in the last year. Just if I didn't say certain days are only for these activities, then I would just fill them up with other things as they came.
Yeah. I relate to that.
Maybe it'll help. I was going to ask you about, you want to think about when, and this might relate to some things we talked about before, but I want to think about a time when you felt or were highly creative or like deeply in touch with your creativity. Could you talk about when that was, what you were doing, or like when, maybe when, or even like you could approach it like, when was the last time you felt highly in touch with your creativity?
Honestly, I can't help but thinking about being in my undergraduate program because of all the people who are also around me with all their creative energy and conversation. And so having everyone feed into each other like that on a regular basis was so helpful. And I think that was the biggest thing, transferring in and then graduating, like how much like that influenced me creatively, like really made me realize like having that community of people to talk to regularly, which is something that I'm trying. I realized that recently, and I'm trying to think about what I can do to fix that in quotation.
Fix it.
Because maybe it doesn't need to be fixed, but the state needs to change,
Just needs to be brought into your life again.
Yeah.
A creative community. What do you think it would look like today, with the idea that, you described earlier, you have a table for working at your studio or at work, and then you have like in your living room, you could draw now. But what do you think a creative community today might look like for you? Like, is it a group that you meet up with and talk with? Is it working together in a shared space? What might it look like?
I think for me, I realized it's definitely a shared space. I was recently thinking about idea of loneliness versus solitude, and how much I've been enjoying solitude, but having someone there that is really I guess worth not having the solitude is something that's something that sounds really harsh potentially, but
It doesn't.
is something that's really special, I think. So
yeah,
or that comfort to be quiet with one another too.
Yeah.
And just having that energy to feed off one another, I guess, with we're both working. I think having an in-person human and I think probably we've thought about this a lot in the last 2 years, of like having people with you is so much different. So
yeah, it is. And that's something, I think it's an interesting transition to go through, maybe from when you're in either community art environments or any kind of shared studio space, or, educational space that's shared. It can be like really wonderful when you're there. There's parts where it's, as you described, like very energizing because you're with everyone's creative spirits and energies happening with you and around you. And then there's times where that can feel very overwhelming and people are like, I can't wait to like get away from that space. And then it's like, you want to kind of find a way to get back in touch with some community, but not maybe like all of the community. And like, where is that balance of how you share space with others? And I do, you're touching on a little bit like this past 2 years of pandemic life and how when we were forced to really not be together, or if you choose to be together, it's this very intentional choice of, I'm going to be with these people during this time. That's a thing we haven't been confronted with before. And how do we take that back with us into these other parts? Yeah, I'd be really curious what kind of, what it would be like for you to build that space with others. Like, even if it's just, 3 or 4 other people and you have that time together to think and talk and make, or just, as you say, work silently with each other too. I know from kind of transitioning to having personal space alone, and who do I choose to share it with and not share it with? Like, it was recommended to me at one point, like to try and get my children more engaged in my space or art making with me. And I like gave a hard no to that. And I realized it's because I just wanted something that was my own, that didn't have to be shared, because so much of the rest of my life had to be shared that I was like, I don't even want to share my cup of water right now. Like, I will not share my private space for creativity. That sounds harsh, but it's also knowing,
I don't think so.
like, thank you. Thanks. But knowing what it is that will fill you and what won't fill you. Do you think that, is it possible for you to build that community space again? Like, is there a place where you could bring a group together, or where does it sit as a possibility right now?
I think I've had a few Zoom calls while I've been making some stuff with a group of friends and stuff like that. I think a compromise on that, like if we're all gonna be making together, which doesn't happen often at all. It's a schedule thing. I think everyone has their own
so
lives.
Hard. Yeah.
But I actually recently, I work with another one of your former students, Jen Angel, and we've had conversations about going to the studio in quotes, to our job, essentially our job workplace, to work on stuff at the same time for like an accountability buddy.
Yeah.
And having that, since we're friends already and like coworkers and stuff. So that's like one step that I've taken. But it's hard to imagine, like, I don't think that kind of space, I think, could exist in the same way again for myself.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't think that's really all that possible. I mean, maybe. I mean, anything's possible, but it's just hard to imagine being able to bring a certain amount of people with like such similar goals, creativity.
Yeah.
Creativity. Words.
Creatively.
Like,
yeah.
Creatively. Oh my God.
That's okay. It happens to me so often. It's like, I know the word. It is not, the syllables are not in the right place at the moment, but the word is coming.
And it's just like thinking about circumstances of life. Everyone has their own things. But I think there's ways around it, maybe virtually.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that Zoom one is, I think that's a really lovely way to do it, because then you can each be in the space that you have available to you, and you can still talk with one another, or even not talk. I have a couple things. I meet with a couple friends like once every, I want to say like 3 months with two of my friends. One lives in Illinois and one is just over in Minnesota, but we Zoom and and we do the same thing where we have it on, we talk a little bit, make a little bit, talk a little bit. And then I'm part of an online writing community too. And every month there's an hour-long writing via Zoom and it's in silence. So the leaders do an introduction and offer a sort of like poem or prompt. And then for 50 minutes, everyone's microphone is off and you're just writing in wherever you are. And then in the last few minutes, there's a closure. And then everyone gets to say aloud a word, just kind of popcorn style, that came to them while they were working. And it's shocked me how connected it can feel to even be working in silence via Zoom with people. And I think that there's a lot of potential in that, even as for art makers too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I love that.
Yeah, it's been so fulfilling in such a unexpected way. And in the December one, my kids were home because it was winter break. And my youngest, who's 7, wanted to join me for it. And so I told her, like what it was. And so she sat with me and she wrote too during the time. And she made it about 20 minutes. And I was like, that's impressive for a 7-year-old though, writing solid for 20 minutes. Like that was cool. Yeah. So, but just, yeah, I mean, I think maybe that's an example of like underestimating the potential of connection for any opportunity, even and at any age in a way too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now I want to talk about, is there anything else you want to say though about being stuck in your creativity or anything that like an insight related to that, sort of how someone else might think about recognizing when they're stuck, or even just like any insight about how to get yourself moving after being stuck? Or are you in a place where you're like, oh, I don't even know yet for myself how to unstick?
Well, I guess I'm thinking, I guess what I've been trying to think about is, I'm really, I would say I'm bad about sectioning off my time and like energy in the way that I'm like, I want to do everything all at once. And then I'll start everything. Everything and then I can't finish everything because I'm a human. Like, and then everything goes unfinished. And so like, and having these expectations of like, oh, this should be finished and you should do the thing. And so like, I've just been having this like kind of phrase and like idea in my mind of like, just like planting little seeds where you can, like just like breaking things up that will grow eventually. It'll just take time, you know, and just like little steps where it's just like, and it's kind of hard because I was also thinking like, like in retrospect of school, like, you have all this time to do this stuff. Like you've been fed, like, so like you've been feeding your creativity like in various ways, but like all the circumstances are so different. And so like, you just have to like break it up and progress where you can, and then kind of, I think, reassess your expectations to yourself. I think, like it's not going to be the same, and like to hold yourself, I think, to like a certain standard of like what things used to be. I think this is setting yourself up for failure, and like that's hard to deal with too. Is what I've come to the conclusion. Like but like having just those little seeds, even if it's like a little bit each day of something that you want to do and something that like feeds you in a creative sense. It could be anything. And then going from there.
Well, even going back to what you said when you were describing that you could sometimes get to the studio on the weekend to that table for 4 hours, even when you compare that to what your expectation was for what you could do when you were in undergrad, it was like 4 hours might be a half day of work of one day of 7. And now that's your full time. Studio time for a week might be 4 hours. And being able to tell yourself that if you get 4 hours in this week, that's a success. Or even if you get 1 hour in for the week, that's a success. And it could be a cumulative 1 hour, like it might be 20 minutes each day for 5 days, and that's success. But I think you're right. Like that changing of the expectation is so important, because otherwise you just kind of maybe keep beating up on yourself. Like, oh, you didn't do it. You didn't get there. You didn't like, and that's, you'll just tell yourself that about yourself. Like, and then have you gotten to a spot where you feel like calling yourself an artist feels phony or anything like that? Or do you feel like you haven't gotten there? Like you've still been able to like feel comfortable holding on to that sort of label, if you will, for yourself?
I have a hard time answering that question because I want to say it feels phony, but I think that's coming from like an imposter syndrome place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because like in terms of expectations, like
Yeah.
whatnot. But it is hard for me to call myself an artist, definitely, because it's like, oh, like what do you make? When I like tell people like, oh, I'm like also an artist. Like, oh God, I haven't really like made a lot lately. Like I haven't like, you know, like I have I don't know. Just yeah. So it's just one of those things where it goes in waves. I don't think I've ever like fully let it go or it fully feels fake, but
Yeah.
sometimes I am. It feels like almost I'm scared to admit it, kind of like, because I'm like I said, like, oh, I'm an artist, like, oh, but I haven't made anything lately. Like,
Right. So that tells me though, too, that there's a tie to the label artist with equating to making, where
yeah.
I would even work to shift that for anyone. Like artist isn't just about making, it's about how you approach the world, how you are inspired by whatever it is that you're inspired by. Like that maybe is more the truth of an artist than it is like an artist makes. An artist makes is like that external construct that we tell ourselves. Like we tell ourselves that, trying to think of another profession that has that sort of thing. Like sometimes when people say they're a teacher, they mean then we automatically assume they teach children. A lot of times where being a teacher can be so many different things. It can be teaching children, but it can be teaching adults. It can be working in a business, and your job is to teach a client about the, whatever it is that you've built or made for them. That can be teaching too. And so in the same way, what an artist is has to be expanded for the general population and for us too, so that we can still hold that title, label, identity, whatever you want to say it is, even when we're not making.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like I hear artists of all age range and experience levels. If they're not making, they have a hard time saying they're an artist. But also maybe we have to expand the way we think about making. Like, is making always physical? It's not. Like we can be making ideas all the time, and that's still a creation place, right?
It's definitely like, I think like the societal expectation, right? Like of like trying to explain, like I think it's like trying to validate yourself as an artist to like the outside world is a big thing. Like,
yes.
Like because everyone kind of shits on artists in a lot of ways. Like, so it's just like, oh, I'm an artist and I'm making all this. Look at it. Like, validate me in my profession. So yeah.
So maybe we just have to, as they say, radically claim the title of artist, whether we are actively making in that week or not, because it's a way of being and not so much dependent on what we make. Yeah. Well, something I want to talk about with you, and I've talked about this with each of the guests so far too, is just thinking about maybe like a dream creative project that you would love to bring together, or if you had every resource at your hand, materials and space and time, do you have a project like that in your mind that you could pull to even in this moment? And if not, that's totally normal and acceptable too. Like, nope, nothing, no dreams right now. Cause sometimes our dreams are just sort of dead for a bit of time. Like they just are. Like, no, I can't do that. Everyone else does that.
Yeah. I would love to be able to make some sort of like large, like immersive, like installation of some sort. I don't know what that would look like, but just like some sort of like something like really large scale and something like almost extravagant, you know? Like, I don't know. That's just something that like having that the luxury of like time and materials and like being able to like envelop everyone in like the artwork is something that's really apparent, like appealing to me. And so some sort of like large installation work.
What does like extravagant look like to you? Like, can you describe the kind of materials we might see in that sort of space or that installation?
I think I'm thinking of extravagant in the way that the quality and richness of materials from like floor to ceiling and like is kind of, I guess, what I'm thinking of like extravagant. Like having the time, like make everything perfect. Insert that perfect in quotation marks. Forget we're on a podcast sometimes.
No, you can just say air quotes. Air quotes.
I think about like extravagant in the way of like having this like in terms of like interiors too, just having this like this richness and like quality of this entire room, but being able to focus on just like these wonderful little details in it too. That's kind of vague, but in terms of like what I'm thinking of extravagant.
That's perfect. This is a more formal question, but what is a creativity insight that you would like to share with other people?
I'll have to think about that for a second.
Yeah.
I just think like I think there's so many things in our lives that most people don't think are creative, but they definitely are. Is something that like I think a lot of people don't give themselves credit, like any credit to being creative when it's like you absolutely are creative. Like look at the things that you do. And I think a lot of times we like define it as a lot of like, you know, traditional art making, right?
Right.
And so that's just something I think about a lot with talking about creativity with like people who might not be in like the traditional art making like field of like they're like, oh, I don't really know, I don't really like do anything creative.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, everyone does. I think everyone does.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's something I also think about when I don't feel like I'm creative in the ways that I'm supposed to be, like whatever that means. And so,
right. Exactly.
And so I'm like, well, what is like naturally flowing from me, I guess. Like it's like I think creativity is like supposed to be natural too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And being able to recognize when creativity maybe feels like, we talk about creative flow, or that's a phrase that's used a lot, and being able to recognize when you have creative flow. And it can happen in cooking. It can happen in walking and listening. It can happen in obviously songs and other art forms that we traditionally call art forms. But yeah, creative flow happens in all kinds of ways for people. It can come through a sequence of, mechanical actions that a job might require. Or I think like surgeons often talk of, have flow in their process too, and what they do. And again, that's like a connection to the hand that's similar to what we associate with makers and artists. But yeah, there's creativity in all the things. And how do we help people see that? Okay, so we're coming to the point where we're going to do what I call like studio time wrap up. And in this part, I have a series of questions. And then also we're going to talk about your song, like your studio mix of 5 songs that I asked you to share with me. And so first though, I'd like you to finish this sentence. And you can take your time to think, of course, like you don't have to respond right away. But when I don't know what to create or make,
Honestly, the first word that came to mind was panic.
Yeah.
Straight up.
I love it.
But as like, if you want a single word to answer.
No, you can do either. It can be single, can be a phrase, but panic. Tell us about panic.
Because I put all the shoulds on me, like I should know how to make, or like I should know what to make. I should know what to do from this. I went to art school. I should, like, I went to school for this. So, so I definitely, I think, have experienced panic when I don't know what to make. At least recently.
Yeah.
A little bit.
I think that a lot of people are going to connect to that feeling immensely. It's funny, outside of school, you hit on this a little bit, but the idea that you don't have assignments to keep you moving. So how do you decide? It's like, how do you decide what to make when there's no assignment? And then that thing of, do you give yourself an assignment? Do you, there's times when I'm invited to be in a show that has a theme, and then that gives me an assignment, essentially, is like, they obviously asked me to be in it because my work already aligned with it to some degree, but I also use it as an opportunity then to rethink some things that I'm doing, like, ooh, what else could I do within that scope? And, but that feeling of panic, of, in a way, it's like nothingness and freezing of like, like there's, what do I do? And then the pressure of the shoulds just kind of, I think a lot of people are going to relate to that. That feel totally. So I asked you to share 5 songs that you could listen to on repeat in your studio or just anywhere. And I'm going to read your songs aloud, and then the title, and then the artist. And then I would like you to share with us about how these songs contribute to your creative flow. So your songs were Late Night Love Letter by, is it Lucid? How do you say it? Or Luxid? Luxid?
I actually don't know.
Luxid. That's who it is. So that was the first one. And then Out of My Mind by Monsune. Outro Ego by BTS. Take You Back, The Iron Horse Cattle Call by Orville Peck. And Moon by BTS. I listened to these this morning, by the way. It was great. I was like, oh, I'm going to listen to this before I meet with them. So how do they contribute to your creative flow?
Well, I was thinking I had a hard time picking songs, but I was thinking, obviously, what I was listening to recently, and like what, like I listened to at different points in my practice and like making. And the Late Night Love Letter and the Monsune song, Out of My Mind, those are big, like decorating songs. Like I will like calm down, focus, and like flow in terms of like when I need to sit down and focus and like think and slow down. I say slow down multiple times, but just like sit down and think at a much slower pace than I usually do, because I feel like I'm going fast all the time in terms of my thoughts.
Yeah.
And I for Orville Peck, like that's a song I could listen to on repeat, and I love him as an artist. Some the rest of the music I feel like in terms of BTS songs and uh just coming back, so like my recent K-pop hyperfixation, um Orville Peck and BTS in terms of like artists I really respect and I think like inspire me,
Yeah.
as well as like Orville Peck is an artist I sing to a lot. And so I was like singing to such, I feel like such a like a release that I didn't realize um that helps me. And so like that's something like I can like sing to while I work.
Mm-hmm.
And I listen to a lot of pop music when I need to just work and not think, right?
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
like have that energy to like occupy my mind
Yep.
and then like let my hands work.
Yep.
And particularly I think like the outro ego song, it makes me think about like in terms of my creative practice and like thinking about that song has really stuck out to me recently because it reminds me of the conversation we actually had, I think, in class when we were together about the word selfish and like recontextualizing like words that have a negative connotation as something that actually like is actually nice in your life. Like the term ego, like it's okay to like trust yourself and have an ego sometimes, you know, like and so and like also that's like it's like a really upbeat like pop song. And so like that's something that I put on for my recent playlist for that reason.
I want to just reemphasize that sometimes the importance of I feel like this is a theme in our conversation today too, is using a word and recontextualizing it, also giving it a wider, broader definition in order for it to be maybe embraced positively in our lives rather than as this thing that contributes negatively or is viewed as a less than quality or characteristic, that these are actually things that we can celebrate and that will help us grow and be more alive if we use them in a way that allows them to be that way. Also, I was thinking, because you mentioned that Orville Peck and some of these other artists too, they inspire you, and just thinking about that I feel like you've also said that in the conversation today too, is maybe paying attention to the things that inspire us and keeping that, like try to keep note on that. Like maybe that's even like a cool little like daily exercise, is to write down 3 things that inspired you in your day. And maybe that would like start to build energy behind it then for whatever sort of comes. I don't know, something like that. So my next question is, what brings you joy in your creative life?
I think what brings me joy in my creative life is that it feels like something that's entirely myself, like really authentic to like my being.
Yeah.
I think
That's a huge gift, to be connected to your work and your creative. Like when I say work, I mean creative work, your art and your expression of that in that way, that's a space that is safe for you to be your whole self. And like that, there's a phrase that I've been hearing a little bit more, like the integrated self. And that's where you bring every facet of who you are into the space or into the work. And that is so cool that it feels that for you and your creativity. Love that. Okay, so the last one is, finish this sentence. My creativity is.
oh, the word that's coming to me is sacred.
That makes me want to cry.
Sorry.
No, in the best way. Like in the best way. I think that's really powerful.
Because I just think it's like something that's just like is so like to be devoted to yourself like that is just like so I think fulfilling, you know, and important. I think just like our well-being.
Yeah. Thank you. Ira, thank you for being here today and for coming so fully yourself and sharing in the way that this is how I've always known you to be too, is to be nothing but forward and honest and clear about just what you think and how you feel. And I'm really appreciative of that in our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so lovely.
Let's take inspiration from Ira and start a list this week about the things that inspire us. Every time you're struck by something, write it down. Or maybe at the end of each day, take some time to reflect and write down 3 things that inspired you that day. And maybe for a little extra in your life, put on your favorite song and sing along as freely as you can and as loudly as you can. Be sure to check out Ira's Instagram page at IRAIRES. And one more thing, your creativity is sacred too. Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it and rate and review wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next week, bye.